Story 1. I knew I had seen movies in the theater before, but I could only remember flashes of them, so I'll say Star Wars. It wasn't called A New Hope then, it was just Star Wars. I was 11. Story 2. It was a low-budget forgotten movie called Toy Story that I saw with my dad in 1995 when I was 5. Story 3. In November 1956, shortly after I turned 7, I saw The Ten Commandments. It was very long. Story 4. The movie was Pocahontas. I was 3 when it was released. I had to look that up. My family has a tradition of extended relatives taking children to their first movie, so my aunt and uncle took me. I have a vivid memory of sitting in my seat with popcorn. Story 5. The first movie I saw in theaters was Fievel Goes West when I was 3, but I do not actually remember it. The oldest movie I recall is Aladdin. Story 6. Star Wars. A New Hope blew me away when I was 7 in 1977, and it still does. I saw Jaws around the same time. It made me afraid of water for 20 years. Another amazing movie. Story 7. I saw an anniversary re-release of Snow White when I was about 4 or 5 years old. I went with my grandmother and we took the city bus to the movie theater downtown. I have no recollection of the film, but I clearly remember going there. The movie theater was in the basement of a tall office building. Story 8. I have dim memories of hiding behind the seat ahead during 101 Dalmatians. Cruella de Vil was terrifying. I could not have been more than 4 or 5 years old. It was not a first-run showing, of course. It would have been in the 1980s. Story 9. Follow That Bird. I was 4. Story 10. Star Wars. The Empire Strikes Back. About 8 out of 10. The audio in the theater was so bad that I could not hear or understand either I Am Your Father or There Is Another Skywalker. Story 11. I watched Titanic when I was 7 years old. I am not sure why my mother thought this was a good idea. I got scared and had to leave. Story 12. Star Wars was shown at a drive-in. Grease was shown in a proper theater. Story 13. Double feature at the drive-in. Popeye and Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. I was 7 years old. Story 14. Mouse Hunt. I was 6 years old and immediately liked going to the movies. That hasn't changed. Story 15. Monty Python and the Holy Grail. I was 5, far too young to understand the comedy, so the rabbit terrorized me. Story 16. The Little Mermaid. My mother and I went straight to the music store and bought the soundtrack. Story 17. I have a memory of seeing Beauty and the Beast. I only remember people in the theater laughing at the lines, "Voila! Oh, you look so and stupid." The movie was released when I was 3, so I may have been 4 if we saw it late in its run in theaters. That feels very early for a memory like that, but it is there. Story 18. I saw Sam Raimi's Spider-Man in theaters when I was 4. It was the first movie I ever saw, and I still remember it. Story 19. Probably Home Alone. I remember it being in the theaters for a very long time afterward. Story 20. I saw The Lion King when I was about 6 or 7. I do not remember exactly, but I remember walking a long time through the mall to get there. Story 21. An American Tale. Een avontuur met een staartje in Dutch. I was 4, I think. The big cats scared me. That is why I remember. Story 22. Logan's Run. I was 10 and one of the previews was for Star Wars. Story 23. One of the first movies I remember seeing was Babe when I was 9. I only realized much later that it was not normal for my mother to leave me alone in a movie theater at that age, so she could run an errand without a child in tow. Story 24. It is annoying because I remember seeing Doug McClure in a science fiction movie about underwater sea monsters and the lost city of Atlantis. I have been trying to track it down for decades without success. I can find Journey to the Center of the Earth and The Land That Time Forgot and similar titles, but not that exact film. I am beginning to doubt my memory now. Laughing out loud. Story 25. This is a very clever way to figure out how old everyone is. Story 26. Probably Return of the Jedi with my father, or a James Bond movie. I can't remember which one. Story 27. Moonraker. I might have been 5 years old and may have seen other films, but the cable car scene terrified me. Story 28. My parents could neither afford to take us to movie theaters nor did they want to. When I was 12, I used my own earnings to pay for the first film I ever saw in a theater, Wild Wild West. Story 29. The Bridge Over the River Kwai. I was 6 with my dad. It was a long time ago. Thank you for the memory. Story 30. I saw the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles film when I was 11. The first spoken word was "damn" when Raphael loses his sai, and I thought my parents were going to snatch me out of there. Luckily, we stayed. Story 31. Bedknobs and broomsticks scared the shit out of me. Story 32. I saw National Velvet, starring a young Elizabeth Taylor. I was 5 in 1943. I got in free since I was under 6. Story 33. Willow. I think I might have been 8 at most. Now I am 41. The cinema in my town of 17,000 residents in Poland is long gone. It is my turn to imprint memories in my son's mind. He is 13, but we started going to the cinema when he was around 4 or 5. By the way, we watched Willow 2, just not in a cinema. Story 34. I was 6 or 7 when I saw American Graffiti at the drive-in in Mapleton, Iowa with my parents. Story 35. Star Wars, the first one to be released, was mind-blowing as a child. The second film I remember was Rambo, First Blood. Story 36. The Harry Potter film with Remus Lupin as a werewolf is The Prisoner of Azkaban. I was so scared that my mom and her friend had to leave in the middle of the movie. I was 5 years old. Story 37. Fantasia and Bambi were not new when I saw them. I was 6 or 7, I would guess. That was almost 5 decades ago. I remember the movies, but not my exact age. Story 38. E.T. the Extraterrestrial. I was 3. I don't remember the movie as much as I remember my then 13-year-old cousin crying when we left. I didn't understand why. Story 39. I saw Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron on a preschool field trip when I was 4. Story 40. I might have seen another movie earlier, but the one I recall most is The Lion King. I was 6. Story 41. A re-release of Mary Poppins in the early 1980s when I was 4 or 5. Story 42. Magic in the Water. I was 8. I looked up when it came out. I feel like nobody but my mom and me saw this movie. I remember they gave us bags of mini Oreos. I don't know why. Story 43. I must have been 4 years old and remember a couple of brief flashes of seeing Star Wars at the drive-in. Story 44. The Warriors were with my dad. It was 1979 and I was in elementary school. Story 45. Star Wars, 1977. At the drive-in. I was 5. In a real theater that would have been love at first bite. I was 7 and did not get it. I was at the movies with the older kids and loved it, especially the popcorn. My sister was not so happy. She was angry that she had to take me out with her friends. Story 46. I remember seeing the Cannonball Run at the drive-in when I was maybe 4 or 5 years old. I fell asleep in the back seat halfway through, but I did get to see the attractive women in the color-changing Lamborghini. Story 47. Holy Uncles in Here. For me, it was Disney's Enchanted 2007. I was 4. Story 48. I saw The Extraterrestrial in 2002 for its 20th anniversary. I would have been 6. My mom said I cried so much at the end that she had to take me out before the movie ended because it returned home. Laughing out loud. Story 49. Gremlins 2. The New Batch and Lord of the Flies both came out in 1990. Story 50. Conan the Barbarian. I was 5. Yes, I am the youngest child. How could you tell? Story 51. Miss Granny. I was young and I do not remember, maybe 7 or 8, but I do remember when Sarah Geronimo was singing Laughing Out Loud. Story 52. I watched Apollo 13 when I was around 6 or 7. I have no idea why I was so interested, but it still holds up for me. Story 53. My earliest memory is watching Return of the Jedi, specifically the speeder bike chase scene when I was 3 years old. Story 54. Follow That Dream. It happened at the World's Fair. I saw 2 Elvis movies when I was 9. Story 55. The first one I remember was Toy Story 2. I was 5. They tore down the movie theater where I saw it and built a Lowe's in its place. It was a really nice theater, and I miss it sometimes. Story 56. My older siblings took me to a Rumpelstiltskin movie in the early 1970s. It was an American re-release by Paramount of a 1955 German film. I did not like it very much. I was about 6 years old. Story 57. I am 29 and the first movie I remember seeing was Cats and Dogs, released in 2001. Story 58. I cannot recall the first but remember convincing someone to take me to Pulp Fiction at 10. Story 59. I was a fairly young boy, maybe 5 or 6, and it was a choice between Gremlins or The Natural. All the guys went to see Gremlins and my mom and grandma went to The Natural, which I chose. I still have not lived it down. I did see Gremlins not long after, probably on a video home system tape, and I would have been terrified. Story 60. It was a Disney cartoon. I'm not sure which came first, Snow White, Cinderella, or Bambi. I remember seeing all three in a theater, probably at a children's matinee. This was around 1964, and none of them were first-run films. I was 3 or 4 years old. Story 61. In 2001, I was probably 6 at a drive-in theater. I fell asleep 2/3 of the way through. Story 62. 6 or 7. Brighty of the Grand Canyon. All I remember is that it was a movie about a donkey. Story 63. The first was Sasquatch in 1975. It scared me. The second was Star Wars. Story 64. Godspell. I guess I was 5 or 6. I went home and recited the poem I saw in the bathroom. Some come here to sit and think. Others come here to shit and stink. While I come here to scratch my balls and read the poems on the walls. Which was weird because it was in the ladies' room. Story 65. Star Wars with my grandpa. I was 5. It is a great memory. Story 66. Does a drive-in theater count? It was Star Wars A New Hope from 1977. I was 6. Story 67. When I was about 6, my mother took me to see Bambi and, because she was older, told me I should get used to being an orphan. Story 68. Lady and the Tramp was re-released in 1980. I would have been 4 or 5, but I am not sure because I do not know exactly which month it was re-released in theaters that year. My first live-action movie was E.T. the Extraterrestrial in 1982. I was 7. I am the same age as Drew Barrymore. We were both born in 1975. Story 69. No Deposit, No Return. 1976. I was 7. It was a summer camp trip to the theater. I am pretty sure I saw Freaky Friday and a Herbie movie that summer, or possibly the following summer. Story 70. When I saw The Land Before Time, I was about 5 years old. I remember because the entire audience was crying at the end. They were all little kids. Story 71. Snoopy Come Home. I was taken out of the theater because I wouldn't stop crying. I was about 5 or 6. Story 72. Oliver and Company was a date with my kindergarten girlfriend. Story 73. I saw Jurassic Park and similar films in the theater, but the one that really stuck with me was The Fifth Element. I did not even watch it completely. I had popped in to kill time before the film I came to see started. I only saw the first few minutes, when the ships landed in Egypt at the archaeological site, and knew I had to come back later to watch the whole movie. The next film to make a similar impression was Serenity. Story 74. Return of the Jedi. I can still smell Jabba's palace. I'm pretty sure someone vomited behind me. Story 75. I saw the Manitou with my father and my brother when I was in single digits. My brother was older and scared, but I thought it was awesome. Story 76. Muppet Treasure Island. I was 5 or 6. Each kid on a Saturday received a sticker when they arrived. Mine had a scribble and I was livid, so I stuck it on the wall. All kids with a scribbled sticker received a Muppet t-shirt. I had to run and find my sticker, but I still got the shirt. Story 77. The Blair Witch Project. I was born in 1992, and my older cousin took me, but she wanted to meet her boyfriend and he never showed, so we just watched it. Story 78. It was not my first movie. I was 8, but it was the first film whose experience I fully remember. Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Story 79, Mystery Men. I was 7. Still one of my favorite movies. Story 80. Yeah, you are not getting my birth year out of me that easily. Story 81, The Little Mermaid. I remember being terrified by the shark scene and begging my dad not to make me go back. Story 82. We saw Digby the biggest dog in the world at our local cinema when I was about 7. We were taken from school. This would have been the mid-1970s. Story 83. Batman 1989. I was 5 years old. I remember the whole movie. I believe it was the start of my love of Batman and comic books in general. Story 84. The Fox and the Hound. I have no idea how old I was because that movie came out a year before I was born, so it must have been a re-release. When the bear appeared, my sister froze in her seat while I bailed out over the back of the seat. Gremlins must have been a re-release too, because it came out the year I was born. When the egg creatures started hatching, I made a prudent decision to wait in the car. Mom caught me outside the theater but not yet in the parking lot. My sister was again frozen in terror. The Land Before Time was a new release when I was 6, and I sat through it without suddenly making other plans. Story 85. The Cowboys, 1972. Starring John Wayne and Bruce Dern. I was 10. I'm sure there were earlier events, but this one stands out vividly. Story 86. The Wizard of Oz. I was 3 or 4 years old. It is still my favorite movie to this day, and no, I am not super old. It was a special screening for school. Story 87. Titty Titty Bang Bang. A boy living in England at the time watched it in a beautiful gilded theater with velvet ropes. That was back when Disney was great. Story 88. Hook. I was 4. All I remember is being terrified by the scene near the beginning where the windows of the children's bedroom are opened during the storm. Story 89. Bullet, 1968. I was 7. Story 90. My dad took me to see Rambo 3. I was around 6 years old. The 1980s were a great time to be a kid. Story 91. When I was 6 years old, my parents took me to see the 1981 film Taps. At the end, when the characters were killed, I sobbed uncontrollably all the way from the theater to our car. The people at the theater probably thought my parents were awful. Story 92. I was 7, almost 8, and watched The Lion King and Angels in the outfield as a double feature. My mom said she had to go to work and the theater babysat my sisters and me. She bought one ticket, and we walked into another theater once the first movie was over. Story 93. I was about 8 when I saw Marley and Me. Imagine the horror on my mom's face when she realized about halfway through that she had brought her 3 young children to a movie where the dog dies. Story 94. The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I was 5 and my grandpa took my brother and me. He always took us to the movies and would fall asleep, which I found funny, but then he would take us to Kentucky Fried Chicken or Red Lobster afterward. I think we went to McDonald's that day, though, because I remember getting a Hunchback toy. Story 95. Annie, it was 1982, and I was 3 years old. I begged my parents to put me in an orphanage because I thought it would be nothing but singing and dancing with my friends. Story 96. I watched the original Planet of the Apes in first grade when I was about 6 years old. Story 97. It was either The Sound of Music or Mary Poppins. I was only 4. Story 98. Cinderella. I was 5 years old in 1967. I mostly remember it because I was excited to go to the grown-up theater instead of the drive-in, where we usually watched movies so I could sleep in the back seat. Story 99. La Bamba at 3 years old. Someone gave me the soundtrack on cassette. As far as I knew, it was the only music in existence. The only thing I knew about Richie Valens at the time was that he made the best music and was from my neighborhood. Because they were unfamiliar with American music, my immigrant parents took me to see it. Needless to say, I was inconsolable afterwards. Story 100. Toy Story 2. 1999. I was 5 years old. I do not remember the film. I only remember my father's extremely loud snoring. Story 101. I don't remember the first, but I remember being very young and asking my mom to take me to a Care Bears movie. About 30 minutes in, I looked at her and asked if it was okay to leave. She said yes. That day I realized I was too old for Care Bears, and she got the sweet relief of not having to sit through the whole thing. Story 102. The Black Cauldron. I was 6 and deeply impressed and scared. Story 103. I saw Titanic several times with different women. I touched my first breast during one of those screenings. Story 104. Star Trek. The motion picture. I wasn't sure how old I was, but it felt like the film lasted about 10 years. Story 105. I was 5 when I saw Bambi. For some reason, I sat alone about 5 rows away from my mum. The cinema was pretty empty. I had an absolute freak out during the scene where the mother dies and couldn't find my mum. Story 106. I was about 6 years old when I saw Batman Returns, and it began a lifelong love of Michelle Pfeiffer. Story 107. When I was 6 years old, I was either watching The Goonies with my dad, which had a blender scene that scared the hell out of me, or watching Pee-wee's Big Adventure at the drive-in. Story 108. I saw Freaky Friday when I was 7 years old in 1976. Our mothers were going grocery shopping, so all of us girls went to the movies. The oldest of the 4 of us was 11 or 12. Story 109. I saw the 1978 film The Warriors at a drive-in movie theater when I was 6 years old. Story 110. My dad took me to see Arachnophobia when it was released in theaters. I was 4. Let's just say I had an unhealthy fear of spiders in my youth. Story 111 movie. The Great Outdoors. Age. Early high school, about 14 or 15 years old. I was around for the Star Wars original trilogy but did not get to see them in theaters. I was only 3 years old when A New Hope was released, so I understand that one. I was not allowed to see a movie in the theater until high school, and that required a lot of begging and pleading. We were visiting my mother's cousins in Montana, and the cousin hosting us paid for the tickets. I was allowed to watch almost anything that made it onto network television, including James Bond films, but I was not allowed to see them in theaters. Story 112. I saw the re-release of the original 101 Dalmatians in 1991. I did not enjoy it because it was too loud and I was not used to sitting still for that long. I was a little scared. I was 5. Story 113. The Jungle Book. I was 3 and went with my dad. We sang The Bare Necessities as best as we could remember it in the car on the way home. Story 114. Coraline was the first movie I saw in theaters when I was 7. I was terrified, particularly of the part where the hand keeps coming after her. Story 115. I saw The Extraterrestrial when I was 5 years old. It was kind of terrifying, but I was laughing out loud. Story 116. I saw Thomas and the Magic Railroad when I was about 5 years old. I remember my parents and I were the only ones in the theater. Story 117. Rain Man. I was 9. I guess my parents did not want to pay for a babysitter. Story 118. I saw The Black Cauldron when I was 4. I was absolutely terrified. It is not a movie for little children. Story 119. My dad took my brother and me to see The Last Emperor because he needed some time away from my controlling mother, his wife at the time, to breathe. She called the police and reported us missing. I was 5. They are divorced. It was a good decision on his part. Story 120. Star Wars, 1977. I was 6 years old. I saw Smokey and the Bandit later that same year. Story 121. Mother, Jugs and Speed. I was 9 and snuck into a drive-in in my brother's car. Then I saw Star Wars a year later. Story 122. There were other movies I had seen earlier, but the first I remember was Jurassic Park. I was 6 or 7. We were camping, and it poured rain all week. So one night we decided to drive into the nearest town and go to the movies. It was an absolutely seminal moment for young Wolf. Story 123. Batman, 1989. Depending on how close to the release date my dad took me, I was either almost 6 or had just turned 6. Story 124. The Fox and the Hound. My mom and I were crying so hard at the start that we left, laughing out loud. We went back another day, and I believe we made it through. To this day, I don't really watch movies that I know are going to be sad or depressing. Sometimes some sneak in. One example is Cold Mountain, and some I know better than to ever watch. The Road. Story 125. I have vague memories of seeing the re-release of Return of the Jedi with my mom in 1985. I was 3.5. Story 126. The original animated Transformers film with Orson Welles as a voice actor traumatized me as a child. I was about 5 years old. Story 127. The first movie I remember seeing was Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. I was 7 and obsessed with horses. My mother said I did not blink for the entire movie. Story 128. Willard. I was 8. I thought I was going to see Willy Wonka. Story 129. My stepdad took me to see the original Pete's Dragon at the cinema near Victoria Station when I was 7 or 8. Right before he dropped me off at a boarding school I was completely unequipped to attend. I always wondered why he was so uncomfortable until I read the synopsis just now. Pete, a young orphan boy, runs away from his foster parents after long-term abuse. He meets a friendly dragon, Elliot, who is visible only to Pete. Story 130. Does the drive-in count? If so, it was Mutiny on the Bounty and I was 3 or 4. I don't remember much, but I recall Trevor Howard as Bly. Story 131. I saw lots of movies in the theater when I was young, but I don't remember them. Then my dad took my buddy Brian and me to see Stripes. We were probably 13 years old, plus or minus a year. It was the first time I saw breasts, and that is the one I remember. And that's a fact, Jack. Rest in peace, Dad. One of my favorite memories. Story 132. I saw Star Wars in 1978 when I was 6. I remember the length of the queue more than the movie. Story 133. Bye by Birdie, 1963. I went with my grandmother. I was 6 years old. Story 134. I saw a re-release of The Song of the South in the late 1970s. My grandparents took my cousin and me to see it. I think we were 4. I remember being terrified of the tar and being asked to stop singing Zip-Pity-Doo-Dah. Story 135. The robots had no idea how old I was. They were guessing the target audience's age. Story 136. I saw a double feature of Superman and Piranha at a drive-in theater when I was 4 or 5. My parents thought they would show the more kid-friendly Superman before the horror film Piranha, but it scared me to death. My parents bought me a couple of real piranhas as pets to help me get over it. They were gorgeous fish. Story 137. Popeye, age 5. Grandma took my sister and me to a matinee. I remember not knowing what a matinee was. I thought it was going to be a play. Story 138. Return of the Jedi at 3. I do not remember it very well, but some parts are unmistakable. Story 139. The Jungle Book. I can't remember my age, but I do remember how long the queue was. We didn't get in. Story 140. I want to say Casper, because I got scared, and my mom had to take me outside to calm down. Story 141. A Back to the Future and Gremlins double feature at the drive-in when the films were new, in a Mercury Grand Marquis station wagon. Story 142. The Land Before Time. I was 5. It was very vivid because I remember going in while the sun was up and coming out at night. It was the first time I had experienced that, and I thought it was the neatest thing ever. Story 143. Psycho was released in 1960. I was 6 years old when my older brother took me to see it. I screamed. It was not a movie for a child my age. Story 144. The Exorcist. I was only 4 and too young to really understand what was going on, so it was not particularly scary. Story 145. The first movie I remember is Recess. School's Out. I was 11 if my math is correct. We were the only ones there, so we had a popcorn fight. It was so much fun as a kid, but now I see what a huge inconvenience that must have been for the movie theater employees. Story 146. When I was 6, I watched Howard the Duck at a drive-in theater. Our car was parked backward with the trunk flipped up, and we were all snuggled together as a family, eating popcorn. Story 147. I was 8 years old watching National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation. Story 148. Goldfinger. I was 6 years old. lying in the back of a station wagon at the drive-in. I was fast asleep within 30 minutes. Story 149. I saw Toy Story when I was 4 or 5. To my young mind, it was something new, half cartoon and half real. The dog chase at the end made me jump in my seat, scared. I have seen every Toy Story film in theaters since. Story 150. I saw The Little Mermaid when I was about 4. The first major film I remember is Jurassic Park, which I saw when I was about 8. Story 151. The first movie I watched was Frozen 2 on my 11th birthday. My parents never let me go to the movies, but I did not tell them that I went. They never found out. I kept it a secret. Story 152. I saw Ghostbusters when I was 6. I could not have asked for a better first movie. Story 153. I am shocked that your parents took 3- and 4-year-olds to movies. I was 13. I had likely been to drive-ins, but that was different. I probably watched a few minutes, then fell asleep in the back of the car. I never remember the order, but the first 2 films I saw were Private Benjamin and Excalibur. Both were with my parents and both contained sex scenes. I vaguely remember the settings because it was so uncomfortable to watch those scenes with my parents. Story 154. Back to the Future. 1985. I was 7 or 8. Damn. Where's that kid? Damn. That was a big deal to elementary school me. Story 155. I watched the original Jurassic Park when I was 5 years old. We lived near a military base that showed movies for $1, and I probably saw Jurassic Park 5 or 6 times that summer. Story 156. Moonraker. 1979. I was about 5 years old. I remember my mom accidentally burning me with her cigarette in the cinema. I can't remember much about the film. My arm hurt. Story 157. Yellow Submarine. I was 8 years old. It was 1968. After the movie, which was at a birthday party, we were playing outside once it had rained. I fell and got soaking wet. I had to sit inside in my underwear while the other child's mother dried my clothes. Such a tragedy. Story 158. I saw Fievel Goes West at the movie theater on the base in Würzburg, Germany. I was 3. Story 159. I think I was 5 when I saw Jurassic Park. It was the most awesome thing I had ever seen. Story 160. A Christmas Story. I was 18. I did not get out much in my youth. Story 161. It was either Bride of Chucky or Pokemon, the first movie. I was 5 years old. Story 162. This might not mean anything to some of you. I grew up in Bangladesh until I was 11. I have been Canadian for more than 25 years. The first movie I saw in a theater was Ora Egorojan. It was made before my time, but they were showing it. It is about 11 liberation fighters in Bangladesh fighting the Pakistani occupying forces. I was about 8 years old. It warrants a rewatch. Story 163. I am sure there were others, but Purple Rain is the earliest I can remember. I distinctly remember the girls in the audience yelling when the movie faded in and Prince sang, "Dearly Beloved" to open Let's Go Crazy. I was 7 or 8 at the time. Story 164. At the drive-in theater, it was Disney's The Fox and the Hound. I was 9 years old. Story 165. The Phantom of the Paradise. I was 7 and went with my aunt and uncle. Watching it now, I can understand why it did not make much sense to me at the time, which is amusing in retrospect. Story 166. Either The Little Mermaid or 101 Dalmatians. I must have been 3 or 4. I have early memories of my grandmother taking me to both. 101 Dalmatians must have been a reissue because it was originally released long before I was born. Story 167. One Missed Call, 2008. I did not get to watch the end of the movie until several years later because the film burned in the theater. I ended up getting some free tickets, though. It was only my family and me in the theater, and we thought the fire was part of the movie until a manager came in. Story 168. Jurassic Park. I was 6 and my father knew I loved dinosaurs. The internet did not exist. Even so, this was a fairly big mistake by my father. Story 169. Sounder. I was 6 or 7 years old. It is about racism and I cried when they shot the dog. Great movie. Story 170. I was 6 when I saw The Sandlot. I went with a birthday party and remember having a small bag of all-dressed chips. I was 100% enthralled by the tobacco roller coaster barf scene. Story 171. I'm pretty sure it was The Incredible Mr. Limpet. I was in elementary school. Story 172. The Little Mermaid, the original Disney version, was released when I was about 4 years old. I tried to run out of the theater crying when Ursula rose out of the sea in her giant form. Story 173. The Jetsons movie in 1990. I would have been 5 or 6 at the time. I bet most of you forgot there was a movie. Story 174. I saw Honey for the first time without a parent. I still remember dancing in the corridor with my friend while waiting to be picked up. Story 175. Thomas and the Magic Railroad. I was 4 and it was terrifying, so I did not go back again until Ice Age. Story 176. The first Star Wars movie came out in 1977. I was 3 or 4 years old. I only remember the opening crawl and the twin ion engine fighters at the beginning. Story 177. Star Wars. My life changed as soon as the Star Destroyer came into the shot. Story 178. Land Before Time. I was 4 or 5. I was obsessed with dinosaurs for the remainder of my childhood. Story 179. I watched Return of the Jedi at the drive-in when I was 5 years old. Annie was playing on the screen to the left. Story 180. The original Star Wars. I also remember the huge line we had to wait in to see it. I was very young. Story 181. It was probably the first Harry Potter movie. My school took us to see it when I was in 4th grade. I attended a small school and the movie theater was about an hour away, so it was a big deal. Story 182. Ghostbusters was released in 1984, and I was just shy of my 8th birthday. I thought Dan Aykroyd and Bill Murray would be standing outside the theater to welcome people because I had seen a news story about the film's Hollywood premiere. Story 183. All Dogs Go to Heaven. I was 4 or 5 and went with my dad. When the dog dreams of going to hell, I was terrified and started crying. I became so hysterical that my dad had to carry me out of the theater. I still have not seen the end of that movie. I am 42 now. Also, not to be a downer, I just lost my 17-year-old cat this morning. I had him since he was a kitten, and I probably could not handle watching the movie right now. Please do not tell me to finish the movie today. Story 184. I saw The Sleeping Beauty re-release in 1979 when I was about 5. It was mind-blowing. I still want to be Aurora and have a soft spot for Disney despite their decline in quality in recent years. Story 185. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I was 8 years old when my Uncle David, on leave from the army, took a bunch of us kids to see it in 1966. It was loud and chaotic, and I did not understand what was happening, but there was hot buttered popcorn, candy, and soda. I only paid attention when someone was shot. The deaths were so dramatic. For a long time, I thought everyone died like that. Story 186. Ghostbusters 1984. I was 6 years old. Yes, the librarian ghost terrified me. Story 187. I was thinking of The Lion King. I remember the theater more than the movie. One day I asked to see a movie and my mother agreed. I told her I wanted to go to that theater, but she told me it had closed. Now it is a Planet Fitness gym. Story 188. Pinocchio in space for my 7th birthday. That's the earliest time I can remember being in a theater. Story 189. I saw Peter Jackson's King Kong when I was 8. It was also the first time a movie made me cry. Story 190. I was going to say The Fox and the Hound, but that came out 2 years before I was born. Laugh out loud. Story 191. Alien vs. Predator. I was very young. Not sure why my mom thought that would fly. I freaked out during the chest-ripping scene and had to be taken out. Story 192. Snow White was my mom's favorite movie. I saw it before I started school when I was under 4 years old. Story 193. The Extraterrestrial. I was around 5 years old. The film's score scared the hell out of me, laughing out loud. Story 194, Babe, Pig in the City. We saw it at a local theater that no longer exists. The empty space is still there. The theater showed 2 movies at a time. It was tiny. I do not remember what it looked like inside. I was maybe 4 when I saw it. Story 195. I think it was Ants. My mom was watching the Jerry Springer movie. My movie finished first, so I sat through half of her film, curled up to avoid the awkward content. I was 9. Story 196. Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. I probably saw some before that, but that's the first I remember. Story 197. High School Musical. I cannot remember which one. I was tiny, but what I remember is that we all systematically came down with an awful stomach bug during the night and the following day. My poor mother. Story 198. War Games. Without looking up the release date, I guess I was 7. Story 199. I saw Star Wars at a drive-in theater in 1979. I was definitely scared of Darth Vader. Story 200. My babysitter took me to see Signs when I was 5. Scared me so badly. I also spilled peanut M&M candies everywhere. She was an amazing person. She passed recently, and I miss her dearly. I doubt she expected it to be that scary. Story 201. I remember seeing The Phantom Menace in theaters at age 5. Story 202. The Towering Inferno was filmed on a military base where my dad was stationed. I was 5. I remember the actor who played Bobby Brady being in it. Story 203. James and the Giant Peach. A school friend invited us to a birthday party, and his parents rented a limousine to take us to the theater to see the movie. As a 3rd grader, it was an amazing experience. Story 204. Ratatouille with my mom and sister. I wish I could go back to those days. I was 9. Story 205. I saw Chitty Chitty Bang Bang at Radio City Music Hall when I was 7. Story 206. How to Train Your Dragon in 3-dimensional format. As a kid, seeing a 3-dimensional movie for the first time was so cool. Story 207. Howard the Duck was not appropriate for me when I was 7. Story 208. A few years ago, my filmmaking partner made a video about this very topic. Story 209. Sleeping Beauty. I was 6, and Maleficent scared the shit out of me. Story 210. I was 21 and saw Ghostbusters at the Guild in downtown Portland. Story 211. Alvin and the Chipmunks. Chipwrecked. I was about 8. I do not remember. Story 212. Bambi. I was probably 5 or 6. Mom would always put my sister and me in our footed pajamas because she knew we would be asleep by the time we got home. I loved those pajamas. Story 213. I have an unclear memory of seeing the train when I was 3 to 5 years old. The only reason I remember it is that I ducked behind the seat in front of me when the train came toward us and my aunt laughed. I was extremely sensitive and hated being embarrassed. Story 214. Sleeping Beauty at the Chief Theater in Colorado Springs. It was around 1960, and I was 4 years old. The witch haunted me for years. Story 215. At the Cinema for Care Bears. The movie in 1988. If I have the year right, I was 7. Story 216. Shrek Forever After. I was 9 years old, and it is one of the best memories of my childhood. Story 217. I saw Popeye starring Robin Williams at the drive-in when I was 6 or 7. Story 218. The Phantom Menace. I could not have been more thrilled as a 5-year-old. Story 219. My mom lied to me and said we were going to see Monsters Incorporated, but we were with my older cousins who wanted to see Jimmy Neutron. I enjoyed it anyway, and later my mom took me to see Monsters Incorporated, just the 2 of us. I think I was 6. Story 220. I remember seeing Ghostbusters, the Care Bears movie, He-Man and She-Ra the movie, and The Jungle Book. I am not sure which was first. I was between 2 and 3 years old in 1984 and 1985. Story 221. Peter Pan, the animated Disney version. I was 4 or 5 in the early 1990s. Truly magical. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.